Hey everyone, Chad Shimabukuro here, Keller Williams, Honolulu. Wanted to put out a quick little video, reference video for the new designated agency, what it means, how mechanically we're going to process that internally with Keller Williams. So first and foremost, on the screen, as you can see, I have the new form. It's called Designated Agency Disclosure and Agreement, and I wanted to chat real quick with you about what those differences are. So dual agency happens. Most people think, if they don't know the difference, they think that dual agency simply means that as a real estate agent, as a licensee, I represent both the buyer and the seller, and that's simply put. And certainly that is one kind of dual agency. But the thing that happens most often, as we see in companies as large as Keller Williams, is the firm or the brokerage represents both the buyer and the seller, whereby the two licensees that represent each are two different licensees, and they may not be working with each other. They may or may not be on the same team. And certainly, one licensee or one agent is not representing both the buyer and the seller. And the trickiness and the nuance of that is we still owe fiduciary responsibility to both. So in a traditional dual agency relationship where there are two different licensees but within the same brokerage firm, that does create a conflict of interest in what we can provide in terms of services and so forth to the actual client or clients in this case. So dual agency is a slippery slope. It is an area of real estate in our industry that you could have a lot of complaints, you could have a lot of violations, and certainly you can open yourself up to litigation and lawsuits. So dual agency is not for the faint of heart. It really does need to be understood a little bit better so that we can then explain what designated agency is and how it could be better. And this idea of designated agency is a brand new idea, but I think it protects the clients, it protects the licensees, and it protects the brokerage at a little bit of a higher level. But mechanically, our forms and our documentation is a little bit behind the idea of designated agency. So first and foremost, what is a dual agency? Hopefully, all of you know this, but here is the description and the definition that comes directly from that previous form that I'd mentioned. Dual agency arises when a brokerage firm represents multiple clients with competing interests. And almost in every case, if you have a buyer and seller that you're representing, they will always have competing interests. The seller is looking and hoping to sell that property for the most amount that he can. And oftentimes the buyer is looking to purchase it for as least amount as they can. With other nuance and negotiations and so forth thrown in there too. This is not uncommon when a firm has a large number of clients and is involved in a high number of transactions, which we certainly fit that mold. Dual agency most frequently arises when a brokerage firm represents both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. It can also arise, however, when a brokerage firm represents multiple buyers who are interested in the same property or multiple sellers in similar properties competing for the same buyer. So, in a seller's market like we're in right now, it is not uncommon for whether we're listing and in a property for sale or whether another brokerage firm is listing a property for sale. But because we have 350 agents, how many of those agents are writing offers on that same property? And in a situation like we're in right now with low inventory, that also can create a dual agency scenario, which is why we have the multiple buyer seller addendums or more than representation of more than one buyer or seller addendum and verbiage that we included in our standard addendum as well. When a dual agency situation becomes known, there is an immediate conflict of interest that needs to be addressed, since under Hawaii law, all of the brokerage firm's licensees are regarded as acting as agent for all the parties represented by the brokerage firm. One option to address this conflict is for the parties to enter into a dual agency relationship. So how does a dual agency relationship work? If the parties agree to be represented in a dual agency client relationship, all of the brokerage firm's licensees then become dual agents simultaneously representing all parties to the transaction. It sounds simple, but it's not. Dual agency or dual agents rather are required to remain neutral in all negotiations and must not advance the interest of one party over the other. While they can work with the clients to facilitate the successful completion of the transaction, there are limitations to the service they can actually provide. For example, dual agents are not allowed to recommend an offering price for a property. nor how to respond to an offer received if you represent the seller. Recommending negotiating strategies are similarly are not permitted. So here's where it becomes tricky, right? It sounds like, hey, just if there's a dual agency, just enter into a dual agency relationship. But the dual agency relationship handcuffs you, so you're limited to what you can do. As real estate agents, as professionals, our clients come to us and ask questions like, what should I offer? And even if you're not in a dual agency, there's a very specific way that you should answer that question so you don't get yourself into trouble by promising future value and so on and so forth. That's a different conversation. Don't do those things anyways. However, someone might come to you and say, hey, John, what should I offer on this property? And if it's a dual agency, meaning, especially if you represent both the buyer and seller, but let's just say that it is a Keller Williams listing and you represent the buyer, and the listing agent is not someone that you even have a relationship, a working relationship or friendship with. You don't even know them, but it's with the same brokerage firm. Believe it or not, in that scenario, if you represent the buyer, both the buyer and the seller are equally your clients, meaning that you owe fiduciary responsibility to both, even though you've never even met that seller before. And that's a nuance and the trickiness of that dual agency. So you can't even help to strategize. You certainly can't provide suggestions on what offer to write. Dual agency, again, is super tricky. And all it takes is for one party or the other, meaning the buyer or the seller, to suggest that, I don't think my agent had my best interest in mind, for that entire thing to go sideways. So, we've talked about dual agency. What is designated agency? A designated agency is another form of a client-agent relationship that may be used to address the conflicts of interest that arise from a dual agency situation. If all of the parties agree to be represented in a designated agency relationship, then the brokerage firm may proceed to designate one or more of the brokerage firm's licensees to work exclusively for each of the clients. The licensees that have not been so designated are not required to remain neutral. The licensees that have been designated are not required to remain neutral and may advocate for and advise the client they have been designated to work with. The brokerage firm shall remain neutral as to all parties represented by the brokerage firm. So here's what that simply means is, now we have John representing the buyer and we have Mary representing the seller. Both are agents with Keller Williams Honolulu. In the past, I would immediately put it under a dual agency relationship. Both of them are handcuffed and cannot provide information to the other in terms of strategy, negotiation, what offer to accept, what offer to write, and so on and so forth. It's very, very limited in its capacity to properly serve the clients. In this new agency, however, designated agency, it allows two different licensees, but within the same brokerage firm, so under the same roof, but two different licensees now can help to represent the best interest of each of their clients. So it is a phenomenal thing, and it provides a better service, a better level of service to the clients, and also potentially, and I say potentially because there's a little bit of work behind it, but potentially more protection for the licensees in the brokerage firm. So what can a designated agent provide in terms of services? Number one, provide information about comparable properties and assist the client in making informed decisions as to what price to offer or accept. That's completely different than dual agency. You're handicapped. You can't do that in dual agency. You can also suggest strategies to obtain the client's desired results in negotiation. Again, something you can't do in dual agency. Disclose all material facts known to the brokerage and or its licensees about the property. Make recommendations for obtaining services of experts and advise on how to respond when the resulting reports are received. It's part of the strategy negotiation, like J1 or the home inspection report or survey. Explain real estate forms, terms, and procedures. Prepare contracts and associated documents. Assist the client in preparing financial alternatives or comparing financial alternatives. And explain closing costs and procedures. So the main ones are the strategy negotiation and the advice that we can offer, where previous to that on a dual agency, you're not able to do that. So here's where it becomes a little bit tricky is our purchase contract in its current iteration is not up to date to support the idea of designated agency. Why they did it like this, I have no idea. Keller Williams does not create this. Keller Williams just looks at it and interprets the information as best as we can to protect the firm and to protect you as licensees. So as you know, on the first page of the purchase contract under A2, which is disclosure, it lists that in most circumstances, we represent the buyer. We would put under A2B, the buyer representation brokerage firm is Keller Williams, and then whoever the listing brokerage firm would go into A2A. In the past, if you personally as a licensee are representing both the buyer and the seller, or if you're writing an offer and the seller is represented by another KW licensee, so same brokerage firm, that both of them would fall under A2C, which is dual agency. We're talking about designated agency, which I believe would be 90 to 95% of the time it's going to be designated agency now, the way that reads. Unless you are representing both the buyer and the seller, that's a dual agency still. That's going to be kind of a very finite scenario. Most of what I see on the other brokers are seeing is probably going to fall into the category in the bucket of designated agency. So how mechanically do we do that? Is in A2C, where it says dual agency, we're going to mark X. But where the brokerage firm goes, yes, we will put Keller Williams Honolulu, as you see on the screen, but we're also going to put by way of designated agency. So we're not just going to put Keller Williams Honolulu as we would in a normal dual agency. It's going to be checked Keller Williams Honolulu by way of designated agency. And then in D1, where it has the addenda, obviously I've put NA for dual agency consent. That's that normal because it's not a dual agency in the context that we're speaking about. And then we're going to check designated agency disclosure and agreement. That's the HBR form that they've created. So that's a brand new form. In the future iterations of the purchase contract, I'm told that will be now an item that's already pre-completed, just like dual agency consent is already typed up in boilerplate. The designated agency will also be there too, but for now it's not. So just check other and type that in. And then below that, we've created our own disclosure that talks and speaks to what the agency is, and it amends the contract so that it's properly illustrated. Because as you can see in A2, it doesn't even show the ability to have designated agency. So we clear that up by amending the contract properly. So mechanically speaking, if you're doing a designated agency, you're going to check A2C, Keller Williams Honolulu by way of designated agency. And then D1, you're going to NA dual agency. Don't include that. And then other, you're going to put those two items, designated agency, disclosure and agreement, which is the HBR form. It's found in zip forms. And then the other one beneath it, you're going to check and then put KWH agency disclosure addendum. The agency disclosure addendum will be attached to this email that's going out. It'll also be on the intranet. We'll eventually get it into zip forms in the Keller Williams Honolulu library, but for now it's going to be sent out via email and on the intranet. And here's what that form looks like. So this is our internal form. And as you can see in the first section there, we're adding, so A, B, C, C being dual agency, D being designated agency. So that's the context that we're creating to better solidify and explain what designated agency is, so that we, while all these forms and these concepts are floating around there in the ether, we want to make sure that we button it up to make it very, very clear to both parties the differences between designated agency and dual agency, so that we protect the brokerage firm, and of course we protect you, and we can offer the best possible service to our respective clients. So that is it. I wanted to make this video to properly explain the differences between dual agency and designated agency, and most importantly, mechanically, how the brokerage firm is going to be using that in terms of the forms and process, and how we're submitting the purchase contract. So if you have any questions, as always, you're absolutely welcome to reach out to me. My number is 808-754-5800. That's my cell number. You can call me or text me. My email, which is always the best way to reach me, is chadshima@kw.com. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. And if you have any questions, please let me know.